Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our February webinar. My name is Dara Patel. I'm one of the client directors at Inspired Instruction, and I'm really excited to have you here today. So, as many of you would already know, our focus for this month is preparing students for high-stakes math assessments. Any of you that attended the January one, you may remember, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. I meant to do a slideshow. Those of you that attended the January one, the focus was preparing students for high-stakes ELA assessments with Dr. Ciano. So you might see a little bit of similarities when we talk about the format of the test, etc. And you're also going to see we're also going to discuss something specific strategies related to the math assessments. All right, here we go. All right, so our agenda is going to be evidence-based test-taking strategies and instructional or general best practices. Then we're gonna look at some tips for type 1 questions. And then we're gonna look at tips for type 2 and 3 questions, all right? Also, the resources that I'm going to talk about will be emailed out to you after the webinar. Okay, so typically it's either end of the day today or it's tomorrow morning. And it's any of the resources that I mentioned in here, okay? If you need anything additional, feel free to reach out to me and we will make sure that you get the resources, all right? And here we go. So let's look at some evidence-based test-taking strategies. Also, these are the general strategies, but it's focused on math. All right, so the first thing you want to do is teach the students how to work through the roadblocks, right? So that's talking about, what are some general issues that might occur when you're taking the test, right? So one example is you read the question that's worded in a way that you find confusing and you don't understand what the question is asking you. How might you solve this problem, right? So I'm going to show an example. So, you will get this tool will be added on the reference sheet when it's sent to you, okay? So another example is there's a student sitting in front of you and has allergies, hasn't stopped coughing the entire time you've been trying to read the problem. It has become distracting. What can you do, right? So the goal here is to teach students that when there is a problem when you're taking the test, having students ready with some solutions just builds their confidence, right? Because not everything is perfect. There's going to be something, maybe, it's too hot, it's too cold, but everything has a solution, especially if you look at it from growth mind perspective. So that's what our goal is here, right? Is developing that growth mindset when you're taking, whether it's NJSLA, or any other high stakes assessments. So there are a few examples of math type. Feel free when this is shared with you that you can create use this as a template, right? And create some other roadblocks. Have your teachers create roadblocks that are relevant to the school setting and have students work on those solutions, right? And talk about those solutions, whether it's as a class or whether students are doing it independently or in group activity and discussing it. Because again, the ultimate goal is to get the students mentally prepared for the actual test day. And oftentimes we see it, right? It's that anxiety that often doesn't allow the students to, overcome the anxiety, I guess, and be able to perform well on the test. So this is one of our biggest, start here. What are our roadblocks and how can I help you prepare for that test day, right? So we're looking at this from a habitual perspective, right? And that regardless of the content, regardless of the type of questions, I need to be ready to take the test. It's like when we go on interview, right? We're always like, what questions are they going to ask? It doesn't matter what questions they're asking. I have to just feel relaxed. I have to do some breathing techniques. So this is what we're developing our students. This is what we're helping our students develop. All right. All right. So let's move on. Excuse me. I'm sorry. All right. Here we go. Again, the link to this document will be shared after this webinar. Okay. All right. So the next thing we need to know is the students need to know the tools, right? Again, if you attended last month, you talked about ELA, now we're talking about math. So test administrators will not be able to answer any questions about functionality when the students are taking the test. So therefore, it is very important that students know how to navigate the online platform. And I cannot repeat this enough. They really need to know the online platform because oftentimes, just like how anxiety will cause, issues, so can not knowing how to navigate the platform, right? So if the student is spending chunk of their time figuring out where to find the protractor or what is this what is this what does this red dot mean or green dot mean, they're kind of wasting their time, right? So it is very essential that the students are provided with opportunities to really become familiar with that platform, right? Or with that program. So let's take a look. All right. So if you go to newjersey.mypearsonsupport.com, or again, I will link this in the handout, in the post webinar handout. All right. If you go there, you click on the math. All right. If you go to the tutorials, that's where you're going to find how to navigate the test nav 8, which is that platform that they use. Okay. So if you hit start, every student's able to complete it. Okay. And then they have mathematics tutorials. This is where it's divided by each of the grade. And again, you click on start and the students can take an, sample test, right? So this is section 1. So if I click here, it says section 1, 22 questions. It is very identical to what it's going to look like on the NJSLA, right? So you're giving them that pure exposure. So if I go up here, you see where it says review. See, it says there are 22 questions, right? Yellow is they're not answered. You can bookmark any of them because then when you get to the very end, anything you bookmark, it'll tell you like, hey, you bookmarked this question. You want to go back? So you want to know that. And you can bookmark it by just simply clicking on bookmark, right? You want to be able to see like, okay, here's an inch ruler, okay? Depending, and I'm going to cover this in a little bit. Answer eliminator, anything you don't want, right? So it's very important for students to navigate, what do each of these symbols at the top really mean? And not only should they be exposed to it to like look at it, they need to be able to explore it. And that's where the time is needed in the classroom, right? It's not a one-day thing. Students might need multiple days. So a good idea might be, hey, today let's just look at multiple choice type questions. And how would you answer that, right? Next day, let's look at multiple select where there's more than one answer, right? And I know that because visually multiple choice is circle. If it's multiple select, it's boxes. So even conversations like this can be incorporated when you are exposing the students to these different, to the platform, right? The type of question. Look, that's multiple choice, that's multiple select. How do you know that? Again, looking at the question, right? Select 3 details that represent. So all of this can be embedded into, when students are exploring the platform. All right, so one more thing. I'm going to go back. In terms of, any students that are getting accommodations, right? Text to speech. Text to speech, that's text only, so it doesn't include any of the pictures or graphics. There's text to speech for text and graphics. So if you know that your student has an IEP or a 504 or any other accommodation where they're going to get text to speech, they need to know what it sounds like, right? And it's really important because those of you that are familiar with text to speech, it's not human, like it's like a robot talking. So you really have to get used to the way it speaks, and that takes time. So students really need to be exposed to it and understand, how it's talked, what button do I press so that way it will speak for me. Oftentimes it'll highlight the words that it is speaking, right? all of that is so important for the students to be exposed to at multiple times in order to be successful, right? There's also equation editor. So again, that's depending on the grade level, there are different types of equation editor. Those are those little tools that they use, right? The protractor, or scrap paper, or line plot, and this is the guide for that for each of those grade levels. So whichever grade level you're teaching, very important that students are exposed to it, right? And now if you can see, right, I mean, just going through this itself, you have the platform tutorial, you have math tutorial, like just looking at the questions, you have accommodation tutorial, and then finally you have the equation editor. There's 4 different things that we just talked about. It's very important that teachers don't talk about all of these in one time period, right? Take your time. And this might sound very basic, but you'd be surprised how many times we need the basic reminders to truly be successful, right? All right, so let's move on now that we've kind of explored the tools. The online tools, exactly what I just talked about, right? The basic equation editor. This is the little, portion from the calculator. So depending on the grade level, the students are going to have different online tools. So I don't know if you remember earlier in the example, when I opened up the website, I think it was for 3rd grade, they had this inch ruler, right? This is 5th grade. They have the grid plot, right? Here's a protractor. Here's the basic equation editor. And so students need to know that which online tools and how to find them, okay? And again, just like us, doing it one time is not enough. They have to be exposed to it as regularly as possible, because really what we're trying to do is demystify the assessment. Like, it shouldn't be a surprise for them when they take the assessment. They should know right away, like, oh, I know there's a ruler here. I can use the ruler to help me with this problem. Oh, that's a protractor. And oftentimes, when students haven't been exposed to these type of things, they don't even know they exist. And then therefore they don't use it, right? All right, so now let's move on to more strategies, right? So again, exposure is crucial. So now that I talked about the different tools, this is what we mean by this exposure is looking at the sample questions, okay? You want to utilize released sample questions and those sample tests, right? So first we talked about the tools. Now we're going to talk about the actual content of it, all right? So many of you may already be familiar, okay? But there are practice tests on the Pearson website. And then currently there are 2 resources where you can get NJSLA like released items, right? And those 2 resources are the New Jersey Digital Item Library, which is very common, right? And then the other one is a New Meridian website, right? So let's look at both of them really quickly. So then, if you haven't had the chance to explore it, you will, you will have now. And again, the goal is you utilize these sample questions to demystify that assessment, right? And prepare the students for the day of the test. So some ways to go about it is use it as like, unit assessments that you have, use it as a practice test, right? Pull some of these questions into those tests. You can use them as models. Oftentimes we're modeling for the students, right? Even in math, we model for the students, then students explain their thinking. Use these questions as a model first. And then once students get comfortable with the type of question, then you can easily release it doing independent practice. Use it as gallery walk, right? We're going to do this together as a class. Here are the different types of questions. Let's go through a sample question. You're going to go through each type of sample question, and we're going to do a gallery walk, right? You can use them during centers. If you have math centers that teachers are doing, you can use them as different centers. And that centers could be, here are multiple choice, right? And not every center has to have NJSLA released item. The center could be, you know, if you're using some sort of a online platform like Dreambox, you know, or iReady. That's one center, right? Then another center is teacher center, where teachers are going to focus on type 2 or type 3 problems, right? We know typically that type 1 problems are those multiple choice questions that are much easier to answer. Then that could be an independent math center. And then students are rotating one center a day. But again, the goal is exposure. I'm exposing you during my math lesson, right? During my mini lesson. I'm exposing it to you during independent work time. I'm exposing you to it during your small group instruction time because I'm trying to demystify the assessment. I don't want it to be a surprise for you the day of the test, right? Because in the day of this test, student is no longer spending time on figuring out the format of the question, where do I find the tools, but rather focusing on answering the question, right? Because I have all the strategies. Now I'm going to focus on understanding the question and answering the question, right? So now let's quickly take a look at the two released item websites, okay? So the first one, many of you may already be familiar with it, is the New Jersey Digital Item Library, right? Once you get here, it's not going to say math here. You're going to have to use a drop down to do math. You select the grade you want. For, you know, sake of it, I'm just going to go with grade 3, all right? And then here you see all the released items for grade 3, right? By the standard. And then simply all you're doing is you're clicking on the question and now you have it, right? You can go about it multiple ways. You can have it where teachers are just releasing this website in their Google Classroom as a Google assignment, right? Where students go straight in here and then they do their work. Only unfortunate thing is there is no way to save. You cannot save the answers in here. So maybe students answer it and then they take a snippet of it and then put it in another form, or teachers can snippet this, put it in a Word doc, and now students have it, you know, where they can type over it and, you know, using Google Docs. But very important that teachers have used the opportunity during test prep time to look at these NJSLA released items, right? And many of you may already be familiar, but doesn't hurt to get a reminder. It tells you the type of question it is, type 1, type 2, or type 3, right in the item type. And then you can always download it as a PDF. So sometimes it's worth it to download it as a PDF and give it to students to even use their pencil to write on it. So at least they're exposed to it and then say, look what it looks like on paper. Now let's look at it the way it looks online, right? And students need to see, like, look at this scroll. You know, you have to scroll down to see all of the questions. And again, this might sound repetitive. This might sound something basic, but having worked with many school districts as a consultant for Inspired Instruction and now as a client director, oftentimes what we hear is that our students weren't prepared, not because of the content, because oftentimes because of the format, or they weren't exposed to the types of questions, right? And so like, I think of this as when you're getting ready for a marathon, right? You don't get ready the day before, right? You don't, like, because when you run for a marathon, you have to practice the, you know, how fast you have to run, how long it is, you know, what is the path. That's similar to taking this test, right? You have to prepare as early in advance, but here are all these other factors that are going to allow our students to be successful, right? So now that we've looked at the New Jersey Digital Item Library, let's quickly take a look at the New Meridian Resource Center. All right, so once you go to New Meridian Resource Center, you know, when you get there, you go to released items, and then you go under mathematics, you pick the grade that you want. So again, for the sake of it, I'm going to pick grade 4, all right? And then once you click on it, it tells you what year, all right? And you are able to, these are all PDFs, by the way. None of them are, you know, online where kids can type on it or teachers can type on it. You can only you can only print them out. But what's great is that these are sets. So you get the whole thing in one shot, okay? So again, this example is of using a rubric and looking at a student sample response, okay? So if I go back, so I apologize, that was the alignment document key. Here's the item set where all the questions are, right? So here's the released items. So this is what the questions look like, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the whole set is together. Unlike the digital item library where you have to like click one at a time, this is a whole set, all right? So students can, again, when we were talking about practice test, these are 12 questions. You can break them up into centers, or you can say we're going to do 2 questions a day, and then we're going to review them, or a peer is going to review them, right? You can go multiple ways. All right, so now that we talked about the 2 websites that give, released items, oops, apologies. Let's now talk about the importance, especially in math, right? That the students need to know the 3 types of tasks that they are going to be, responsible for answering. So again, as simple as it sounds, oftentimes that is missed, that there are 3 types of questions you're going to be asked, right? And which one should I answer first? Should I first go to the type 2 and type 3, or should I go to type 1? Well, you should go to type 1 because those are the multiple choice or multiple select. Those are easier to answer, right? So again, type 1 are the questions where the concept, the skills, and the procedures are being questioned, right? And students need to know it's machine scored, so it's either right or wrong. It doesn't based on what I think is right or wrong. It's really right or wrong. And knowing the different types of questions that are asked, right? So there's multiple choice. Multiple choice is one choice answer, right? Multiple select, that means there's more than one answer. And typically in the question, it says select 2 answers, right? Select as many that are true. And students need to know this vocabulary. That's part of knowing these tasks, right? Drag and drop, what does that look like? Drag and drop. Can I hold it enough to then drop it? Again, it takes time. Inline drop down, that's like those scrolling, right? You click on the little arrow, it gives you options, you pick one. Graphing is when you're literally doing the dots. Equation editor is where you see the little calculator and you have to put in the numbers and the symbols, right? So important to be exposed to each types of questions within that task. And again, data shows, right? If you look at the NJSLA released data for, all of the evidence statements, there are most type of questions are type 1 questions on these tests. So teaching students type 1 questions is so much easier than going to type 2 and type 3. Type 1 questions are a lot easier to do as a do now in the classrooms, right? To do them as an exit ticket. Again, expose them, think about all the different ways that I can do that. And type 1 questions are the easiest to expose in a minimal period of time. Going to type 2. Type 2 are the reasoning type questions, right? When you're explaining your thinking. They have to understand that these are hand-scored component and worth 3 or 4 points. The biggest thing here is they're hand-scored. It's important to know because students need to understand when I'm answering this question, there's a person that's reading my response. So if they do not understand what I'm trying to say, I may not get my full points. And that's so important to remember that I'm trying to convince a human why my answer is correct, right? Same thing with type 3 modeling. They are hand scored. Therefore, the person that's reading the question has to understand what I'm trying to say. Unlike the type 1, you do get partial credit. So that's a plus point, right? And then you need to share that information with the students, right? Now let's look at the types of questions that are asked. These are multi-part questions, part A, part B. I see there's a Q&A here. That is right. Somebody just wrote, just recently learned in a workshop that multi-select means there's a possibility that there could be more than one answer. There is more than one answer. Multiple select, you're going to see boxes, okay? That means there's going to be more than one answer. Multiple choice is where there's one answer. And you can tell the difference visually because multiple choice are circles and multiple selects are squares, okay? So like have students just practice, right? You see them as squares, just try to select all the boxes. Does it work? Oh, so that means you can't select all the answers, right? Sometimes they'll say, so I'm seeing here that someone said that Inspired Instructor representative said that multi-select could still have just one answer. Is that true? I'm going to get back to you on this one because I see that both of you asked the same question. So let me double check and get back to you. So I will have it in that webinar handout. When it comes out, the answer to this question will be in there. Okay, so as a matter of fact, I'm going to write it down. Okay, and I will get back to you. But great question. Thank you for asking again. All right, so let's, and please, as you have questions, just keep dropping them down in the here in the QA so I can continue to keep answering. All right. All right. So where was I? All right. Looking at the type 2 and type 3, these are multi-part, right? Part A, part B, typically they are connected. All right. Part A would be find the answer. Part B might be explain your thinking. All right. May include an element above, may include any one of these in here, the way that they're going to respond. And it also includes constructed response. Those are those long, explain your thinking. I see another question just pop in. That's another great question. Multi-select questions. Do they get partial credit on these if they choose 2 of the 3 correct answers? I'm going to get, I don't want to give you the wrong information, so I'm going to make sure I double check that. My answer is no. However, depending on the points, they may be able to get partial credit. But let me get back to you. So again, on the handout, you're going to have the answer to this question. So thank you again for asking this question. I'm sure a lot of people had similar questions. So be sure on the lookout in the handout. Thank you again for asking. All right, again, if you have any questions or comments, please make sure you use the Q&A and add them in there. I'm frequently checking as I'm going through this. All right. All right. So let's talk about some general strategies when it comes to test taking. All right. So the first one is read the problem twice. I see another question coming through. Thank you. You're welcome. No problem. All right. So first one is read the problem twice. Why do we read the problem twice? Because you can sometimes miss something very crucial the first time. Oftentimes, you know what students do when they're reading math especially, they look sometimes for those keywords like total, sum, how many, and then what do? They pick a either multiplication, addition, subtraction. They relate that to a one of those addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division, and then they just do that. And oftentimes, one of the answers is going to match that answer, and there's a chance they're going to get it wrong. So the reason why we read it twice is for the first time I'm reading it to make sure that I understand all the words that I'm reading. The second time I'm reading it to make sure I understand what is being asked of me, right? So read the problem twice. Second one is use scrap paper, all right? So the reason why we want to use scrap paper is because that's where we can start putting our thinking on paper, right? You want to be able to put it on paper. Next one, eliminate incorrect answers. As simple as that sounds, students don't do that. And there's an online tool which teaches you how to eliminate incorrect responses. When I showed you that example earlier, I was actually doing it to show you, but there's a little X at the top. And when they click on that, you can eliminate as many answers as you want. You want students to eliminate the answers because it makes it much easier to come down to the right answer. So if they look at the question and immediately they know this choice is not correct, cross it out. Cross it out makes it so much easier to select for you to be more successful in picking the answer. All right. I know oftentimes students will just go like, oh, I know this is the one. I say go backwards. Do process of elimination, because if you do process of elimination, the chances of you being correct is higher, because it wasn't just like as if reading the problem once, right? Oh, I just saw how many. That means it had to be addition. Same concept. Eliminating incorrect responses really helps you with the justification process, all right? And finally, the most easiest one is skip and come back. What's great about NJSLA, right, is when you skip a problem, at the very end, it will tell you, hey, you skipped question number 4 or question number 8, and then you will be able to go back to anything that you had skipped. Same thing as bookmarking. When you bookmark it, it will tell you, hey, you bookmarked this question. So have them bookmark it. Bookmark the question because you need to look at it again. Absolutely okay in doing that, right? All right, so let's move on. All right, another strategy that your teachers can implement right away is incorporating it into their homework. All right, so here's a strategy called the four square homework. Again, this will be linked in the handout. All right, so the first square, which is here, is cumulative review. And it allows the students to practice any previously taught skill or prerequisite skill to current task. So connecting something that you learned in the past to what's happening right now, okay, to a current task. The second and the third type of square homework problem is anything from problems from your daily lesson that are taken from the curriculum to reinforce the style of questioning students will see regularly, okay? So we're going to explore that a little bit more. I'm going to show you an example of that, right? So anything that's, that the students are exposed to that from the curriculum, you're putting it into their as a homework question, right? And then the fourth one is aligning the NJSLA item to show students the similarities and differences between how questions are assessed on the curriculum and then on the state assessment, right? Because we all agree, I'm sure, that the way we teach it in the curriculum doesn't always reflect the way it looks on the test, right? So oftentimes with a lot of teachers who will try to mimic NJSLA-like assessments into their classrooms, great strategy, right? But very time consuming. Therefore, start small, start having those conversations of how does this look the same? How does it look different, right? And why? Okay, so again, this is a homework, 4-square homework, so you would just pick one of the 4 to give to the students. And again, this strategy will be included in the post-webinar handout. All right, another strategy to try is regardless of which type of question you are doing, this can work. And it's called math around the classroom. So one example is you write a problem. Here's, write a problem that will equal to a number. In this case, it's 36. Students can use whatever combination of operations they want to use, but they have to come up with the number 36, okay? You can use chart paper, right? So you can have 4 different chart papers with, it can says, write you can make it as specific as you want, or you can keep it as general as you want. Then, you can have 4 different areas and you're doing, this is 36, this is 152, it could be write a division problem that will equal to, right? Write a PEMDAS problem that will equal to X, Y, and Z. Another one is problem solving cards, okay? So this is where you're seeing the problem, the problem you have to solve on an index card or in a printed card, and you are now reading the problem, and you can do this in group or they can do it independently, right? And then they're solving the problem. Another one is you're doing it as math stations where there's rotation. They're going to have different types of problems at each station or center, and you're going to do those. And the last one is solve and show your steps, right? Pretty generic. Here's an equation, you're gonna solve it. You can have multiple of these around the room, right? Or you can have one of the solve and show step. You can have one problem, one where you're making a question, and then one where you are actually doing a word problem when, with these problem solving cards. All right, so now let's move on to specific types of tips for the different types of questions, right? So the first one we're going to look at is tips for solving type 1 questions, right? So if you go back, those are those multiple choice, not open-ended, right? It's like drag and drop, line drop, graphic. Let's talk specifically a few tips for those types of questions, right? So the very first tip is, which I already kind of talked about in that homework piece, is the side-by-side instruction. So before teachers give it as a homework, right, very important, it is done in the classroom. Otherwise, we're setting students up to fail, okay? So here's an example. This is a question from the curriculum. It's simple. What is the area of the rectangle below? And now, if you look at the NJSLA version, it says, which rectangle has an area of exactly 6 square units? It is very important that students understand they're both talking about area, but look at the depth of the question. Very clear, right? This is the one from the curriculum is very straightforward. This might be in one of the Envision workbooks that you might be using. This might just be constructed by your teachers in your curriculum, but oftentimes these are the questions that we see, right? Very simple, just analyze this graph. But now if you take that question and put it as NJSLA, what you start seeing is that these questions provide context and deeper thinking, right? There's a deeper thinking involved. Students need to be able to identify what do they need to do to be successful on the NJSLA type question. And the best way they can do it is if you do a side-by-side instruction. Let's look at the curriculum. Let's look at an NJSLA type question. What do you notice that's the same? What do you notice that's the different? All right, how would we tackle the one that's on the NJSLA, right? Going back to the exposure piece, you're exposing them to the content through NJSLA perspective, right? Let's go on to tip number 2. This is the scrap paper lessons, okay? Again, this link will be shared in the handout after the post-webinar. I see something just come through here for a Q&A, so I'm just double checking. Awesome, I like that you like that idea. So type 1, another type 1 question tip is scrap paper lessons, right? Teach the students how to organize the scrap paper so it's clear and they know how to solve a problem. Oftentimes, students are given scrap paper and they don't know how to use it. Got to teach them how to use the scrap paper because they've never seen it before, right? They need to know, like you write one number per box. You use a box for a decimal. I know it sounds very basic. Again, one thing I've learned as I still do consulting and have been in all the districts is when kids see a paper that's not identical to their lined paper in their notebook, it's a complete different story. They're like, what do I do? Like, look how easy it is to use scrap paper to do a division problem than using a lined paper. But you gotta teach your students how to use it, right? Transferring the key information back to their answer sheet when they're finished, right? I did all of this work, but what am I putting on the computer when I'm done, right? It's very important. So an idea is circle your final answer on here. Circle it first, so then you know that's the answer that's going to go in the computer, right? Again, those operations, those symbols, you want to put all of this in here because think about it. When you review your questions, and did I do it right or wrong, and you've put all the symbols and you have nicely organized your scrap paper, you can find exactly where you solve that problem on the scrap paper. And these are skills, that students really need to learn and practice on daily basis to be truly successful on the day of the test. Right? So now that you've learned 2 tips for type 1 questions, let's move on to tips for type 2 and type 3 questions, all right? So the first one is error analysis. Again, this link will be shared in the handout, all right, after the webinar, but it's called what's called a can you spot my mistake? As obvious as it sounds, it's literally can you spot my mistake, all right? So what students get is they get a problem here, okay? They see a student work and a solution, okay? And what the students are responsible for is identifying and explaining the error, Okay, remember, in type 2 and type 3 is that reasoning and the modeling piece. That means justifying your answer. So in order for students to be able to do that, they have to be able to identify if there is an error. And then what they have to do is they have to say, okay, this is where the error was, but this is what the correct solution is, okay? And then share a strategy. So here's a sample question, right? Here's a problem. Here's a student work and solution. You can use this as a start-off point, okay, for the teachers to try in the classroom, because again, first students need to learn, what is this activity? What does "can you spot my mistake" really mean, right? This is you're trying to help another peer figure out where they made the mistake. And so use the sample as your starting point to teach students how to do it. Use this as, a whole group discussion. And then you have this template, again, will be shared with you at the end, to do as many problems as you want to do, right? So that's one strategy. Next strategy, because again, reasoning and modeling, student work analysis, okay? So in addition to justifying your answer, part of the question is going to be for students to analyze the work of another student, to be able to explain, right? So this is very important for students to be able to do, because one, it's time consuming, right? Two, the students have to be able to explain their thinking, right? And the whole goal is we want to demystify the assessment. These are often the hardest questions to answer, often takes the longest, right? So the more students are exposed to this type of work, the stronger the students are going to do. So students want to be exposed to the rubric. Like, what should the student have done in order to get 1 point, in order to get 2 points, in order to get 4 points? What needs to happen for them to get those full points? And if students have never been exposed to the rubric, then they don't know what the expectations are, right? It's like when you go on the marathon, there's a list of things, right? That you need to have this, you need to have this. Like, there's a list, there's rules. And so students need to know rubric is what gives you the guidance of how to get those full points. Because if I've never looked at the rubric, I'm going to answer the way I think it needs to be answered, right? So student work analysis allows students to really analyze the rubrics and truly understand what is being expected of them to get those full points. And then when they start understanding the rubric, then they're thinking like the person who's going to be grading their paper. Right? So that's the difference between the two problems. The other one is, can you spot my mistake, helping a peer? This one is really looking at the rubric to help you understand how to solve the problem. All right, so now, as we're coming to an end of our session, I want to just remind, if you're looking for any lesson plans or activities for NJSLA released items or high stakes assessment, our resource library has tons of free lesson plans and activities to help prepare your students. All right, so I'm going to show it to you quickly. If you go on our website, inspiredinstruction.com, and you go to resources, you're going to find all the reasons. These are all free. Okay. If you want it, you can go under subject and you can pick, Park, NJSLA, and math, and it's going to narrow it down for you. All right. Once you click on it, it will come to download now. You can't just download it right away. You will have to put a little bit of information to then be able to download. Okay. But it is free. It is absolutely free, and it will be downloaded in a PDF format. I highly encourage you to explore our resources option. Okay. And also, in addition to providing resources, we also provide job embedded PD support. So whether it's, we offer in-person, live, like virtual via Zoom, asynchronous workshops on high stakes assessment topics, and as well as job embedded support. So like followed by coaching and, coming into the classrooms and talking about how do you implement this into your daily instruction, right? We meet you where you are. So if you're looking for that, I highly encourage that when you, again, go to our website, let me just go back. If you go to our website, Inspired Instruction, click on this workshops, and you will see all the workshops that we have to offer. All right. And last but not least, I would really appreciate if you just take a moment to fill out the survey. So that way that gives us a feedback of how helpful this information was for you, and any tips and strategies for me to get even better at, my next webinar, all right? But again, any of the questions that you guys ask, I wrote them down, will be included on the handout post-webinar that you should definitely receive by tomorrow midday, okay? As well as any of the tools that I talked about during this webinar. All right, so just give me a second so I can put this survey into the link. I would greatly appreciate it if you can fill out this survey. So for my growth, so then I know how I can improve, whether it's my pace, whether it's the resources I shared, anything. Any information to me is very valuable information. All right, so that ends our webinar. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any questions that you want me to include in the handout, feel free to drop them in the chat. All right. Oh, the chat is disabled. Okay, so what I'll do is I will put it in the Q&A, and let's see if you guys can. All questions. Will you send a video of this? I missed the beginning. Yes, this is recorded and it will be uploaded on our website. I can quickly show you where that is. Okay. I'm so sorry that the chat is disabled. If you want to take a second to just write in the Q&A how this webinar was helpful or any helpful information for me, I greatly appreciate it. And I apologize, but I do appreciate your flexibility. If you can quickly just take 1 minute to put in the Q&A any feedback for me. And for someone just asked, like, is this video going to be shared? The video is going to be uploaded. So if you go back onto our website, inspiredinstruction.com, and you go to events, okay? By tomorrow morning, and you can see past events and recordings, the link is already there, but this will be uploaded right here, and then you would be able to see it free of charge, obviously. And you will get the handout. Since you attended, you will get the handout for attending the webinar and any free tools that I spoke about. Thank you so much, Brittany. I truly appreciate it. I see you said copy and paste the link in their browser. Helen, I'm not sure if you are telling me to do it. If so, I put it in the chat, but it seems like chat is not visible. I mean, if anybody wants to write this down, the link to this, which says forms.gle, I mean, you don't have to do it. You can just leave a quick comment in the chat box, and I will definitely go through it and make the necessary adjustments I need to make on my end to make sure that your next experience with me in the webinar is as smooth as it can be and successful. All right. Thank you so much for attending. Oh, it says attendees can do it. Oh, thank you so much, Kimberly, for pasting the Google form in here. I'm hoping. Thank you so much, Latoya, for sharing. That was a great session. I greatly appreciate it. Awesome. I'm so glad. And again, guys, even if I don't have, I know I used lots of examples. I will paste as many things as I'll link as many things as I can in that handout. So even if it's not something that is editable, you will still be able to give your teachers examples. And then so when they watch the webinar, they then have the, example right next to it to be able to go back and forth with. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for your feedback. I see them coming through. Truly appreciate it. I will stick on for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions that they'd like me to answer or include in the participants handout when I send it out by midday tomorrow. But otherwise, thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the Tuesday. I'm going to put myself on mute, just FYI. If I see a question pop in, I will unmute and answer. I see some helpful feedback coming through, so thank you for those of you that are able to.